All right, gonna talk about another game that I played on my own time. I didn't stream this one, but I did have fun with it. I mean, if fun's the right word, given the atmosphere. Yeah, we'll go with fun. Ender Lilies, Quietus of the Night. Apparently, the sequel, Ender Magnolia, came out fairly recently. And this is a Metroidvania. And much like the last Metroidvania that I talked about, which was Cookie Cutter, it is, by and large, a Metroidvania through and through in the classic sense. The way that it unfolds, unlocks, the way the map expands, the abilities you get in terms of traversal are pretty much all classic. You will get the equivalent of a double jump, a wall grab, a grappling hook, midair dash, all of the things that open up traversal for you to reach areas that you couldn't get to before so that you can open up and expand more of the map, including going back to areas where you started but saw places where you couldn't get to. It all unfolds like that very, very traditionally. Whereas Cookie Cutter was very much infused with a cyberpunk aesthetic and energy, kind of an early 90s sort of thing, this is very much going for the Dark Souls feel. Now, for clarity, I have played a little bit of the first Dark Souls game, not a ton, because I tried it out like right at sort of the edge, right before my motion sickness got so bad with fully rendered 3Ds that like I can't play anything like that for more than half an hour tops. So I have not gone back to it, but I did play a bit of it, and I did get a sense of it. And I've certainly heard I've been hearing people talk about it for years. So this has a lot of infusion of Dark Souls in it, both in terms of the aesthetic. It is a fantasy setting that is dark, it is dreary, it is always raining, and there is this sense of corruption, of metaphysical, otherworldly corruption that is happening. It's called the Blight. So that is what you are combating. Most of what you are fighting are twisted versions of things like dogs, birds, mostly, however, people, knights, archers, the people who were intended to defend this realm who have since fallen to the thing that has overtaken it. So it's very much that. And also, I'd say the difficulty is a bit more in line with Dark Souls than necessarily with traditional Metroidvanias. And what I mean by that is sort of the nature of Dark Souls combat is no matter how strong you get, almost any enemy can take you apart if you are not focusing. So even as you get stronger, even as you get to the point where you can take out things that used to be almost used to feel like mini boss fights in just a handful of hits, you still have to focus, because if you don't, they will still take you down. And also just the almost kind of relentless pursuit of the boss fights. You're gonna fight a lot of these bosses, especially the main bosses, multiple times, and it's gonna feel like a gauntlet. What's interesting to me is this is not the first Dark Souls infused 2D game that I've played, because I've played Salt and Sanctuary, and that one didn't quite click for me. I think ultimately what I appreciate about this one versus Salt and Sanctuary is this really only takes the combat in terms of the main mechanical influence from Dark Souls and sort of the nature of the combat, as I said. What I felt with Salt and Sanctuary is the movement felt stiffer. It felt more deliberate, it felt very much like a deliberate choice. But this had what I'm more used to in terms of a 2D Metroidvania, which is, you're dashing, you're zipping about. It may or may not save you, but you can move around pretty quickly. And I really felt clunky trying to navigate Salt and Sanctuary. I think I've tried to play that game 3 times, and I just got ticked off trying to deal with the first boss, and I've walked away every time. This had a number of bosses that did get me to a point where like I had to walk away for the day, but I still wanted to come back and take them down. I didn't have that with Salt and Sanctuary, but I had it with this. So while I'm not necessarily going to say it's a better game, but for someone who is has a lot more affection for Metroidvanias than for Dark Souls, and who is willing to engage with sort of a flavoring of that, this maintains that a heck of a lot better than that game did, at least to my taste. There's also some interesting smaller touches. So your character in this, you're playing a white priest, which is a young girl. And if you're wondering, how is a young girl going to defeat like these massive corrupted monsters? Not directly is the answer. While functionally, in terms of how things work, everything still kind of handles as if she was doing it herself. But like, she technically never swings a sword. She never does any of this stuff. What she has is she has purified spirits that she accumulates across the game. And she summons those to do stuff for her. So you start out with the Umbral Knight. And whenever you attack, he appears basically behind you and slashes. And while that sounds like it's going to be slow, like it is I mean, some of them are slow. I use the big dude with the hammer for actually most of the game until I had the Umbral Knight like fully upgraded. And I was like, okay, like he's now fast enough and powerful enough that he's better. But my point being is that like the animation speed and everything else is about what you'd expect if it had been the character themselves swinging the sword, but that's not technically what happens. And it's kind of an interesting thing. And like you summon a witch to throw projectiles, and it's largely an aesthetic difference, but as I think I kind of talked about when I did the cookie cutter review, when you're talking about Metroidvania games, there's only so much tweaking you can do to sort of the core essence of it. I think a lot of that tweaking usually has to do with combat if we're talking mechanically. So like, as I mentioned when I talked about cookie cutter, that was a much faster paced combat. And there was a finishing move for every single enemy. You get them low enough, you can hit them with a finisher, and then they're done. And it was a lot more frantic. Whereas this is a bit more deliberate with its combat. And the combat is, you don't feel particularly powerful with the combat here. And that is affected by the mechanics. But that is just, there's only so much you can tweak with that. Whereas the core of Metroidvania, of the way the map expands, the way you get new traversal abilities, or the ability to unlock or break through doors that you couldn't before to get other places, like that just is what it is. Like gaining these new abilities that let you access older areas, that's just what a 2D Metroidvania is. It's what all of them are. The primary difference is largely aesthetic. Its mood and its tone, and whether or not it suits the genre and or the tweaks that have been made to it while still remaining a Metroidvania. And this has a darker, more somber, again, very Dark Souls tone to it. And I did enjoy that aesthetic. And it's kind of nice for me to have a game like this, given that I'm never going to go back to the Dark Souls series proper. Just because of the motion sickness issue. And even then, I'm not sure how well I'd get on with it. But this kind of gives me a feeling of that flavor, of that world feel, while still being in a genre that I'm much more comfortable with and am much more readily able to enjoy. So it's a nice balance, and it's a nice reminder that when you have a really solid, really well-established core mechanic, for a genre, you don't have to reinvent the wheel mechanically if you instead opt to just really, really lean into a really strong aesthetic. Cookie Cutter did it. This does it. This is a bit older than Cookie Cutter, for reference. And I don't know when or if I'll get around to the sequel. I try not to back-to-back Metroidvanias. I try to put some distance between them because they can get quite samey otherwise, just by the nature of how much is very much a staple of the genre. But I enjoyed this quite a bit. And the story, I followed it decently. I wasn't paying a ton of attention. It doles out the story in that sort of Dark Souls way of, there's aspects of lore and things that you can find out. And this has, scraps of letters you can find, and I skimmed them. I got the gist of it. I'm sure there are people who are much more into the lore. I've said repeatedly over the years, I am way more into narrative than I am into lore. But also, if I'm going to play this kind of game, like, I'm not necessarily expecting narrative to be the strongest thing. I mean, there's a reason why with, say, the two games that spawned this whole genre, Castlevania and Metroid, they're kind of better known for their atmosphere than their actual narratives. You know, Castlevania with its atmosphere of gothic monstrousness, and Metroid with this at times almost cosmic horror and this isolated alien feel to it. It's a really good genre for atmosphere. It's not a great genre to tell an A to B to C story, and so most of them don't. And you get a fair amount of this, and that's fine. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I for me, the aesthetic was enough. The actual narrative, from what I got from it, cool. Totally awesome. I'm sure some people got a lot more out of it because they paid a lot more attention to it. But that's me. Ender Lilies, Quietus of the Night. I liked it. I'll probably end up wishlisting the sequel. Again, no idea when I'll get around to it. I might try and get around to it before the year's over. If only just because I'm trying to get better about getting to at least a few video games in the year that they come out. At least now and then, but I don't know. We'll see. But I'm not going to jump to it right away because, again, Metroidvania games can start to feel a little too samey if you do them back to back. But in any case, have you played this? What did you think about it? If not, do you have a Metroidvania game that you want to plug or shout out? Whatever your thoughts might be, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. Those all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. And now to thank my highest supporting Patreon supporters: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Fernabilax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam RDL Taylor, Palbo Rabajoggle, Mary Mello, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you want to see me try and read your name while dealing with these little pains in my butt, check out the rewards on my Patreon and see if there's any that you like.